What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me here, Ron Harris, on the Ron Harris Muscle Channel. Today, I want to continue my throwback series of looking at vintage shows that had very special meaning to me and to a lot of the other older fans out there. And hopefully a lot of you younger fans will get an appreciation for some of the past greats that we had in the sport. Today, we're going to talk about the 1989 Arnold Classic. This was the first Arnold Classic, and it was significant because up until this point, the only contest that had really good prize money and prestige was the Mr. Olympia, which had been around since 1965. But Arnold Schwarzenegger stepped up. At the time, he was the top box office star in the world. So not only was he a huge star to us bodybuilders as a 7-time Olympia champ, which at the time was a record. Lee Haney would tie that record in 1990 and beat it in 91. But at the time, Arnold had the record of 7 wins. He was the #1 box office star in the world. He had already starred in Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Destroyer, The Terminator, Commando, Raw Deal, Predator, The Running Man, Red Heat, and finally he ventured into comedy with Twins with Danny DeVito. So Arnold decided he was going to throw his hat in the ring and put on a really good pro show. He had been promoting shows with Jim Lorimer, a few of them before this, including a couple Mr. Olympias, but this was going to be something that was just his, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic. He kept the prize money intentionally just a little bit below the Mr. Olympia prize money for first place. But however, one big change that he made was that he would throw in a Hummer H2 and an Audemars Piguet, I don't know how you say it, really nice watch, like a $25,000, $30,000 watch. So the prize package for first actually exceeded the Mr. Olympia winner at the time. So he did this actually was on NBC Sports World. It was part of a weekend coverage. I found out it was going to be on, and I taped it and watched this thing like 30 times. This was the first month, March 89, that I started competing. I was a hardcore bodybuilding fan, still am, of course, but I was a kid. I was 19 years old. I was just in love with the sport, couldn't get enough, read every magazine. Anytime I heard it was going to be on TV, I watched it, taped it if I could, and would watch it over and over again. So let's get into it. So let's get into the top 6, guys. First up is going to be a guy named Bertil Fox from the United Kingdom. I believe he was originally from a Caribbean island called St. Kitts. Most of the great black bodybuilders from UK originally from in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, originally from places like Barbados, St. Kitts, Jamaica. Bertil, no exception. He was known for exceptionally thick development. He had this, you'll see, massive slab chest, delts, bulging traps, rugged back, huge arms, especially the triceps, biceps. Yeah, he was a monster. He was one of the mass monsters long before we had mass monsters. So let's take a look at Bertil. So Bertil, let's see, before he moved to the IFBB Pro League, he'd started over in NABBA, which was huge in the United Kingdom, still is. He was a amateur NABBA Mr. Universe, and then he went on to win the Pro NABBA Universe twice before going over to the IFBB. Never won a pro show in the IFBB Pro League, but he had been second place at the 1982 United Champions, Albert Beckles, second place in the Switzerland Grand Prix to Mohamed Makawe. At a Grand Prix show in 83, he beat Lee Haney. And that same year, 1983, he was 5th place at the Mr. Olympia. So he had been a top 5 Mr. Olympia competitor. Unfortunately, he would be known more infamously for a double murder that he committed 8 years after this in 1997 on the island of St. Kitts. He was engaged to a young girl. He was 46 at the time. She was only 20. I don't know what happened. The engagement was broken off. So he walked into the dress shop that I believe her mother owned, murdered the mother and the daughter, 36-year-old mom, 20-year-old daughter, got convicted the next year and would do 25 years in prison for murder before being pardoned by the governor of St. Kitts 2 years ago in 2022. He is now back in the United Kingdom living, but it's unfortunate that he's remembered for that more so than as a bodybuilder, because he was one of the first mass monsters. Look, you saw how thick and dense that muscularity was. That was not common back then, guys. As you'll see, we didn't have that many guys. He had been looking like that basically since the late 70s, early 80s. So let's move on to 5th place, Bob Paris. Now, Bob was the first openly gay pro bodybuilder. A lot of people celebrated him for that, for this courageousness in coming out. A lot of people felt he was sort of blacklisted and didn't do as much in bodybuilding as he could have or should have. Condition-wise, I didn't ever see him in great condition, but goodness gracious, this guy had, as you'll see, he was one of the inspirations for classic physique because he had beautiful proportion, shape, structure, perfect shape, structure, and everything. Wasn't a huge guy. By today's standards, he would be able to do classic physique. 6 foot, 230 pounds. He fit exactly into that. I mean, Bumstead's heavier than that. Rough Bumstead's probably a little bigger than Bob was, but Bob was a master of posing. That's what he was really known for. Let's take a look. And he took chances with his posing. He would do poses, and incorporate things that nobody else would do. Yeah, you could see that a condition wasn't great here, but still, he took top 5. He had turned pro in 1983 at the NPC Nationals. No, I'm sorry. Back then, you couldn't turn pro at the Nationals. You had to go. Winning the Nationals didn't even turn you pro, the overall. You still had to go to the World Amateur Championships, just like Lee Haney had the year before, and you had to win your class there against all the other weight class winners from around the world. Maybe it could have been 100 other countries. He never won a pro show. He was in the top 3 at 9 different shows. Best he ever did in the Mr. Olympia was 1984, 7th place. Probably because he just wasn't big enough to compare to some of these guys who were, thicker, more muscly, more densely muscled. But you can see, man, he was not missing anything. Everything was proportionate. And the posing is what he was really known for. To this day, people still go to YouTube and look at his routines for inspiration on how to put a great posing routine together. He was a master. And, like I said, he took chances. And one thing, I cut off the commentary so I could talk over this, but Arnold even commented that he did something toward the end here. He gets down on the floor. Like the song he was posing to was Bang Bang by Cher. And, he's pretending he's basically been shot and he's dying here. Which, how many other bodybuilders would have the guts to do something like that? But Bob did it, and he pulled it off. He was a great bodybuilder. He would unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but he wrote Gorilla Suit. It was a very bitter sort of look back at his pro bodybuilding career and his life as a bodybuilder. I had reached out to him, I think, once for an interview and got something back that was very, very snippy, because he's never really done interviews, and he wants nothing to do with the sport anymore. But he will always go down as one of the greats. People still talk about Bob Paris as far as the symmetry, the shape, and that posing. He was one of a kind. Next up, we're going to go to Samir Bannout. Samir was the only Mr. Olympia champion, former Mr. Olympia champion, competing here. He would take 4th here. Samir had won the Olympia in 1983, and he would only win one other pro bodybuilding show in his entire career, the 1990 Pittsburgh Pro. He would compete until 1994 as an open bodybuilder. Didn't place at the 90 Olympia. He would come back in the 96 in the Masters Olympia, which started again in 94. Well, let's take a look at Samir while I'm talking. The Lion of Lebanon. Yeah, Samir was known as the Lion of Lebanon. Another guy who was not huge, but beautiful shape and proportions. He had some great body. Those arms were fantastic. The triceps, back. He was known for being, look at that shape. If not the first, he was definitely the first guy to show extreme dryness and detail in the Christmas tree, the lower back, when he won the Olympia that year. So he would come back and do the Masters in 96, took 6th, came back again at the 2011. The last time he ever stood on stage was 2011 Masters Pro World, which was won by Dexter Jackson. Samir took 11th in that show. But man, again, he was about 5'8" and 190, 195 maybe. He was under 200 pounds, but had a small waist, everything in proportion, no weak body parts. He had it all, calves, abs, arms, even there where I don't think his condition was spectacular here, but you could still see that lower back. Always had great. Look at the proportion. Look at the calves. And another really graceful, masterful poser. This was an era where we had a lot of guys who were spectacular posers. They put a lot of time and effort into their posing, and it really shows. Yeah, Samir was fantastic. He's still around. He still does podcasts and stuff to this day. Interesting factoid. He was married to, was it Labrada's sister? I think he was married to Lee Labrada's sister. They were in-laws at one point. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, that I believe they were brother-in-law. I know they were brothers-in-law at one point. I believe that's how they were related. I think Samir was married to Lee Labrada's sister. I don't think it was. Yeah, Lee wasn't married to his sister, so that's what it had to be. Okay, we're going to move on to third place, a guy named Gary Strydom. Gary had won his pro card at the 86 Nationals after getting citizenship. He was originally from South Africa. His pro debut was the United Champions in 1987, and he won that in a field of 24 men. The only Olympia he ever did was 1988 in Los Angeles, where he took 5th place. So that had been a few months before this. He had been severely, I would say, over-dieted because I had that show on tape too when I was a kid. He was like 229 pounds at 6 foot. He would go on to be much bigger later on. He won 3 Grand Prix shows this year, 1989. They would have been after this because this was the first show of the pro season. He would be second at 3 more pro shows in 1990. He would be more famous for the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. But let's take a look at Gary. So Gary was known, he had a great physique overall, but he was known mainly for these quads. He had great quads and his delts. Some of the best shoulders when he puts his arms down. Maybe when he hits like a hand hit most muscular. Look at how round and full his delts were. Some of the greatest delts we ever saw. His back was never quite as good. That's the one area, but look at that. Great shot for him. Those quads were something else. Lived in Venice. He was also known for being one of the first entrepreneurs. While he was still competing in the 80s, he had his own clothing wear line. It was called Crazy Wear. My Christian had platinum everywhere, but it was, the big baggy pants, the big sweatshirts, the string tank tops, all that stuff. I think he had some spandex short stuff. I had a few Crazy Wear pants. I think we all did at that time. So he would only compete in the IFBB Pro. It was just called the IFBB back then. We didn't have 2 IFBBs. So in 1989, he did those shows. 1990. Then Vince McMahon offered him a contract, which was reported to be $1 million a year, and I don't doubt it. I know he was the highest paid athlete out of 12 that they had. He was the champion of the World Bodybuilding Federation, which was Vince McMahon's attempt to sort of make bodybuilding mainstream the way he had taken pro wrestling into another realm, basically. And he wanted to do the same for bodybuilding. Didn't really pan out, but Gary was their champ in 91, 92. He was much bigger there. He was about around the 260 in great shape at that show. And the best he ever looked was in those WBF shows. Was it because he had so much damn money? Could he afford better coaching, better drugs? We didn't have much coaching back then. Who knows? So he did come back 2 more times, but I feel like he was punished. He came back in the 96 Night of Champions, could only do 12th place. The last time he would compete, he would pop up one last time in 2006 at the age of 46. At a show that was the Colorado Pro. It was promoted by Sean Ray that year. He took 7th place. And the guy that won that show, the Colorado Pro in 2007, making his pro debut that year was Phil Heath, who would go on to win 7 Mr. Olympia titles. So let's move on to 2nd place. A true legend in the sport, Robby Robinson, the Black Prince, who had been around competing since the late 60s, early 70s. He's in the movie Pumping Iron briefly. You'll see him. You'll spot him a couple times. At this point, he was 42 years old, Robbie. Robbie had won the first 2 Night of Champions contests in 1978 and 79. The significance of Night of Champions was, until that point, there were no other pro bodybuilding shows. If you were a pro bodybuilder, all you could do was the Mr. Olympia until 1978. There were no other shows until the Night of Champions came along. Wayne DeMille was a promoter. It was always held in New York City. So Robbie won the first couple of those. He did very well at the Olympia level. Let's take a look at him, and then I'll talk over the posing. Yeah, so Robbie did very well at the Olympia, like I said, a few times. In 1978, he was actually the heavyweight Mr. Olympia winner, but in those days they had a heavyweight and a lightweight, over and under 200 pounds, and they would do an overall. And that year, Frank Zane beat him for the overall, but he was a heavyweight Mr. Olympia winner. He would win 8 pro bodybuilding shows in the FBB, and the first Masters Mr. Olympia, 1994, where he beat Lou Ferrigno in a show that a lot of people thought Joe Weider had sort of created for Lou Ferrigno to finally have an Olympia title. Robbie was known, for his great overall physique, but those arms, those biceps were so incredibly peaked. People always talked about the Robby Robinson bicep peaks. And supposedly the legend has it that famous bust of Joe Weider with the arms crossed, that was actually Robbie's body. And Robbie was pretty upset about that because he didn't get paid. He would go on to win the Masters Olympia over 50 category 2 more times. The last time he did it was in 1991. Robbie's still around. He's still shredded if you follow him on social media. He's in his late 70s at this point. Smaller version of what you're looking at right now, but goodness great. He is in like contest condition all the time. He stays super, super lean, Robbie. And he's still an inspiration to a lot of people. And yeah, he was an inspiration. Like anytime I had interviewed Lee Haney, Lee would always talk about people like Arnold and Robbie. He was always one of the ones that Lee would mention as one of his greatest inspirations as becoming a bodybuilder. Last guy I'm going to show you is the winner, Rich Gaspari, the Dragon Slayer. Just to set it up a little bit, Rich had just taken second place at the Olympia a few months before this. He took second at the Olympia in 86, 87, 88. Did he get it in 99? In 89? I think he took it one more. No, I guess that was it. So, no, I think he got it one more time. He won 9 pro shows. This would be the final show that he would win. But let's take a look at Rich and I'll talk. The Dragon Slayer. Yeah, so Rich had no intentions of competing in this. No one did. No one knew that the show was happening. So in 88, he had taken second at the Olympia in Los Angeles, and then he had done seven Grand Prix shows in a row across Europe, battling Lee Labrada for first and second. He won 4 of the shows, and then Lee beat him at 3 of the shows. So they were going back and forth. But Rich was known as a Dragon Slayer. I had pictures of this guy taped up to my walls. He was a huge inspiration. I aspired to look like him. I didn't think I could ever look like Lee Haney, but I figured, well, Rich is my height. He's 5'8". He's from the East Coast like I was. He was from Jersey. I was from Boston. Known for just brutal trainings. One of the most intense trainers ever. Super thick, dense muscle. Super strong guy. Just a really hardcore, intense guy. Had those veins. I mean, that's the look I really wanted. And Rich was known for always being a very entertaining poser. Put a lot of time and effort into coming up with nice creative routines. So he said Arnold had called him, shortly after he wrapped up the European tour and said, I'm putting on the show, my first Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic. I'd really love for you to come compete. And Rich wasn't, he was burnt out, but he's like, I can't say no to Arnold. I've interviewed him about this a few times. I actually worked for Rich for over 10 years with Gaspari Nutrition, doing a lot of writing and stuff for them. Like Rich a lot. I've trained him a few times. Such a cool guy. Love Rich. And Rich couldn't say no. This is Arnold. Arnold was his idol, like a lot of our idols. Arnold flew him out to LA, got him on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, which was huge for a bodybuilder, man. How many bodybuilders get to be on the Tonight Show? And he pulled it together. Now, interesting, 2 weeks before this, Rich had a slight pec tear while bench pressing. Other guys might have pulled out. Rich did not. He kept on training. Obviously, he had to be very careful. Wasn't doing any bench pressing those last couple of weeks. He said you couldn't see any deformation. You couldn't see a dent. But a couple of weeks after the show, he said you could definitely see that the pec had retracted and there was a dent because it was still inflamed and swollen. I guess you couldn't really tell at that point. He waited too long to get it repaired. Scar tissue had formed. And unfortunately, he was never able to get that repaired because he waited too long. Anytime you tear a muscle, guys, you want to get it repaired within a week or 2 at the latest. Otherwise, it's your chances of having it look normal again are very much diminished. So yeah, Rich was an amazing competitor. He had turned pro at the 84 Nationals at the age of 21 and was chasing Lee Haney. He was Lee Haney's greatest threat for years. Lee called him Rich the Itch because he was just like would not go away, would not leave him alone. So let's take a look at the win. That'll be the last thing we'll see. So here we have top 2, Robbie and Rich. Rich and Robbie waiting for the announcement. Rich gets it. Very happy to win, of course. And it was a prize of $55,000 cash. And he got the Hummer and the watch too, I believe. So here we have the medals being given out to everybody. Yeah, you can see this. The stage setting for this first Arnold was okay, but man, they've really stepped up their game significantly since then. It's like cardboard cutouts, and they had that. I mean, it doesn't look bad, but compared to the stage sets and everything that they have now, there's Joe Weider, the late Joe Weider. You know, the godfather of bodybuilding. Guy who really put our sport on pro bodybuilding on the map. Without him and his brother Ben, we wouldn't have the sport of bodybuilding. We really wouldn't. Not as we know it today. It was a very obscure sport until the Weider brothers came along and, you know, gave it a ton of publicity through their magazines, and Ben put on contests all over the world. Yeah. And there's Rich getting his backstage interview with Arnold. You can see how happy he was. Look how young Rich was. Look how young Arnold was, man. This was 1989. This was 35 years ago. Wow. Anyway, guys, I really hope you enjoy these. I'm going to keep doing these. I get a lot of enjoyment out of doing these because I'm looking back at shows that I saw years ago. In many cases, I haven't seen this footage in many, many years. That I hadn't looked at that footage probably since 1990. But again, I had it on VHS and I used to watch it all the time. Yeah. So, guys, if you like what you're seeing on these, please subscribe, like, share, and ring that notification bell. Helps me grow the channel. Doesn't cost you anything. Really want to make this channel something special. Want the content to keep getting better and better. Doing a lot of good things here with the help of Jen Geraci from MD Days. We were a great team over there, and we continue it over here. Guys like Giles Tiger Thomas helped me out a lot. I appreciate that. Big Mike Cox helps me out with the channel. Appreciate all you guys who watch and support the channel. Means a lot to me. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of anything you want. The contest, anything you'd like to see future videos of. Any kind of feedback is appreciated, and it's good for the algorithm. So please keep watching these. I'm going to keep doing them. Love the sport. Love you guys, the fans, my fellow bodybuilding fans. We're all in this together. And what's the last thing I want to get you to do is follow me on Instagram. Same thing, Ron Harris Muscle. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching this top 6 rundown of the very first Arnold Classic in 1989. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.